Now, as we discussed, the banking system is a major part of India's financial market, and the banking system in India comprises primarily of three players. The first and most important player is the Reserve Bank of India, which is the premier regulator of the banking system in the country. Right? It is responsible for regulation of the entire banking sector. And below the Reserve Bank of India, you have the different banks which are participating in Indian financial markets. Broadly, these banks can be categorized into two types: scheduled banks and non-scheduled banks. So the banking system in India comprises of the Reserve Bank of India as the apex regulator, the one who is responsible for regulating, guiding, supervising everything regarding the banking sector, providing new licenses, abolishing licenses, everything is done by the Reserve Bank of India. And below the Reserve Bank of India, you have the different banks which are operating in the scenario. These banks can be broadly categorized into two types: scheduled banks and non-scheduled banks. So first, let's see what do you mean by scheduled banks? So scheduled banks are those banks which are included in the second schedule of RBI Act of 1934. Now, anybody can tell me what is an act? What is an act?
So when a bill is passed by the parliament and accepted by the president, then it becomes an act.
Yes, the technical definition is correct. An act is basically, in layman's terms, it is a law. This is a law which is made by the Indian democracy. This is a law which is made by Indian Parliament. If I wish to introduce a new law in the country, I have to first introduce a proposal. That proposal is known as a bill. I put this proposal on the floor of either one of the two houses of parliament, either in the Lok Sabha or in the Rajya Sabha. Discussion takes place on that proposal. Once the proposal is accepted by either of the houses, it moves on to the second house. It has to be accepted by the second house. After that, it receives the president's assent, the president's approval as they call it, and then this proposal, which is presented in the form of a bill, becomes a law, and that law is called as an act. So Reserve Bank of India Act is essentially a law which governs the establishment and all the factors regarding the Reserve Bank of India. Right? Now, what do you mean by schedule? Schedule, whatever you like to call it. What is a schedule? Anybody?
Constitution मध्ये 9 schedule आहेत ना.
हा, मग schedule काय असतं?
सर सेट ऑफ नाही सर त्यांना थोडे एक्स्ट्रा पॉवर्स आहेत.
ओके, म्हणजे एक्स्ट्रा पॉवर्स आहेत म्हणजे मला कळलं. Anybody who can help me out? What do you understand by a schedule? कोई भी सुना होगा यार तुम लोगों ने. लॉजिक लगाओ, क्या होगा? मधुमिता, what do you think is a schedule? मैंने यहाँ पर इमेज भी डाला हुआ है.
Sir, a process, or carrying a procedure basically.
Okay, Atri, what's your opinion?
Maybe an appendix to a document. I don't know.
Appendix is a good term to use, man. See, now I'll give you a fictional scenario. Take it. So I am saying that the following in this act, there will be certain provisions, right? So it will be essentially deal with, let's say RBI Act के अंदर RBI banks को govern कैसे करेगा, इसके details लिखे होंगे, right? So let's say there is a statement that the following provisions shall apply to all scheduled banks, और उसके नीचे उसका लाइसेंस RBI अप्रूव करेगा, उसके बोर्ड ऑफ डायरेक्टर्स को RBI अप्रूव करेगा, फलाना RBI अप्रूव करेगा, ठिकाने RBI अप्रूव करेगा, लिखा होगा, right? Does this sound good? Or the following provision shall apply to Andhra Bank, State Bank of India, IndusInd Bank, ICICI Bank, and so on and so forth. I mentioned all the 100, 200 banks which have been included, to whom those provisions will apply. What seems better?
Sir, first one.
Obviously, right? Secondly, now assume that a new bank has been introduced and I want to extend the provisions of this act to that new bank. So do I amend the entire act, and wherever these provisions apply, do I introduce the name of that bank, or do I simply bring an amendment to the schedule? I add the name of that bank to that schedule and I keep the act as it is. क्योंकि act में क्या लिखा है? The following provision shall apply to scheduled banks. तो act वैसे का वैसे रहा, सिर्फ schedule में मैंने amendment किया. So it's basically a tool. It's an appendix. It's something that gives you additional information. So this schedule does not have an independent existence of its own. This schedule derives its existence from the original act, and it is related to something that is present in the original act. It tries to make the functioning of the original act simpler. Is the idea clear, Madhumita?
Yes, sir.
Right. So schedule is something that gives you additional information. Act is a law. Schedule is something that you add like an appendix that gives you additional information about certain features that might be contained in that act. So in case of RBI, the second schedule contains a list of all the banks which RBI considers as scheduled banks, which RBI considers as being worthy. If you remember the context of Thor, right? So RBI considers these banks as good banks. RBI extends its supervision over these banks. RBI extends its protection to these banks. So all those banks which are included in the second schedule of the RBI Act are known as scheduled banks. There are certain criteria which they need to fulfill in order to become a scheduled bank, right? So these scheduled banks, they need to have a minimum paid up capital amount of rupees 5 lakh, not 25 lakh. Please change this, right? They need to have a minimum paid up capital and reserve amount of 5 lakhs, and they have to submit the details of their banking activities to the Reserve Bank of India every week. Right? So once you fulfill these categories, you become worthy of being added to the second schedule of the Reserve Bank of India. Right? In addition to this, there is one more requirement which I didn't specify. They have to convince the Reserve Bank of India that their banking activities are being carried out in general public interest, and they are carrying out their banking by sound business management principles. If you are able to convince the board of the RBI that you are a good bank, only then you find a place in the second schedule. The moment you are included in the second schedule, you become a bank which enjoys the protection of the Reserve Bank of India. By protection, I mean in the event of failure, Reserve Bank of India helps you get out of it. How does it help? देखेंगे हम लोग, मतलब क्या special protections मिलते हैं scheduled bank को when you compare it with other banks. We'll see. Right? So scheduled bank, essentially a bank which is included in the second schedule of the Reserve Bank of India. It has a minimum paid up capital of rupees 5 lakhs. They have to submit the details of their activities periodically to the Reserve Bank of India. So what are the protections or what are the special measures which the scheduled bank of India, which the scheduled banks, they enjoy over and above the non-scheduled banks? This we'll deal with later sometime when I come to that topic, when I introduce certain basic concepts to you. But as of now, for you, the important thing to understand is that scheduled bank is a bank which is included in the second schedule of the RBI. It fulfills certain criteria that has been put up by the RBI, and because it fulfills those criteria, it enjoys certain benefits. It enjoys certain perks of being a privileged bank, right?